45 of 5 reasons not to harm your loved ones during quarantine. This is part 2 of our 5-part series on abuse and domestic violence. If you recall, on Friday, we talked about the different kinds of abuse, that there's emotional abuse, um, and how that's kind of a silent abuse because that can have a lot of, excuse me, allergies, not COVID 19. A lot of blaming of the partner, isolating them, name calling, yelling, control of finances, stalking, um, threatening to report their immigration status, or to tell their employer confidential things. And so we talked about that. We talked about social abuse. That would be the isolation, not letting someone be with their friends or their family. Um, and then we also talked about, of course, physical abuse, sexual assault, sexual abuse, um, and some of the more common modes of abuse that we hear about in the news. Um, Today, I'm going to talk about basically the surge in domestic violence that has occurred since the beginning of COVID 19. And um, and why that is. And I did speak with one of the detectives at a local jurisdiction this morning just to confirm that what I suspected was true. And yes, in fact, there are more cases being reported than there had been when we first started the stay at home order. There's also been more arrests. And the reason, uh, or the distinction, I guess, in what I was told this morning is that in they are seeing more cases of child, parent, parent, child. And I'm not talking about child like a 3-year-old. I'm talking about child like a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, 17-year-old, and the parent. And if you, it's logical that that would be the increase over, spouse on spouse or live together partners, because, especially seniors in high school, but I'm sure any one of these teenagers, their social lives have been completely put on hold, and there are different levels of enforcement by different parents. So, of course, there's groups of kids doing things that aren't supposed to be doing them, um, because they're supposed to be at home. They're with more than 10 people. Because of social media, every other teenager knows it's going on and they want to go too. And, when you tell your older teenager, you can't do that. Well, why not? Joey's doing it. Because I said so isn't a satisfactory answer to these kids. You have to have well reasoned, thought out explanations. And they're over it as far as it's your own safety and your own health. So parents, you have to be armed to talk to them about, different things, different consequences of violating the stay home order or going to a protest. Because now those circumstances and those consequences are much bigger than you're just going to get sick. And it's not just going to get sick. You could be majorly sick. You could die. But they don't seem to be registering that in any meaningful way right now. What it appears they're doing is, they just want out. They want their normal, not Governor Whitmer's normal. And so if you explain to them that the reason that it's under 10 people is because of these statistics. The reason that we're not allowed to go to restaurants and eat at restaurants is because it can't be disinfected fast enough, thorough enough if you have that many people in one place. So that's basically just something that you can talk to your children about if things are starting to escalate, and that's the argument that people are having. So, as I was told this morning, And I'm talking about the region where, Detroit, Wayne County, Oakland County, that's where we're seeing this increase of teen parent domestic violence. And it has become kind of an everyday situation. As we've talked about before, in Michigan is a matter of policy. Anytime there is a call to 911 for domestic violence by anyone, it could be from a child, a neighbor, the person who was involved in the incident, a stand, a passerby, it could be anyone. When the police come, if both people are on the premises for policy reasons, they are required to arrest or remove, and it's always arrest 99.9% of the time, who they believe to be the aggressive party. Um, a lot of times this causes difficulties because it isn't what the people involved in the argument intended. And especially if someone not part of the household has called 911, the situation may have diffused by the time the police get there. They're talking, they're back and like being civilized to each other. No one's clearly in danger at that moment, yet someone still has to be removed and arrested. Um, we talked about very early on what happens procedurally after that, and we're going to go through and talk about, the law more specifically and the penalties and both what it's like to be a complainant in these cases as well as what it's like to be accused in these cases later in the week. But today, let's talk a little bit more about what we know about um, what they're calling the double pandemic, and it is the rise of domestic violence in the age of COVID-19. And I mean, this is now widely published. There's articles by the Council of Foreign Relations. There's statistics being kept and monitored by the Economist. There's certainly all kinds of news outlets reporting on this. And so it's really important to keep all of this in mind. So I wanted to start by showing you um, this little chart, and you'll see that domestic violence calls have increased while crime has decreased during the coronavirus and during the stay-at-home order across the country. The one on this side, because it reverses, is actually in Denmark. But as crime has lowered across our state, domestic violence has increased. And that has been the phenomenon worldwide. It is not unique to it's not unique to Michigan. They've seen that in the five biggest American cities, this has been the case, and there have been over 100,000 reports from police departments in Chicago, Kansas City, LA, Memphis, and New Orleans from March 19th and 24th, where total crime fell 25% and domestic violence increased by 5%. And that was back in March when this all started. So now we're in even more of a trend up as people have been home together and annoying each other longer. Another thing that we've seen, and the statistics show, is that there hasn't been as much where initially when we were on home detention is what I was going to call it, but the stay-at-home order, we talked about that there weren't a lot of places for someone who was the victim of domestic violence or the victim of any kind of abuse to report or for it to be reported because they were at home. So they didn't have the ordinary access to people to report. That certainly was a factor. As countries have opened up, though, the research institutes have been studying, and there has actually been some foreign policy put in place for Women at the Center is what it's called, if you want to Google that, and that will tell you all about, you know, intimate partner violence in the last 12 months, and that it has been some anywhere from there's been 243 million women and girls between the ages of 15 and 49 worldwide were subjected to sexual or physical violence by an intimate partner in the last 12 months. So that is a really, really scary number. And we know that part of that was during the stay at home order, which, depending, is, as I said, these are global statistics. So, you know, China has been locked down since, I believe, last October. So, just keep that in mind. Um, because of growing unemployment, people being sick, and increased anxiety about money, or scarcity of community resources, as well as what we talked about earlier, that that kids really want out. They want their lives back. They want to see their friends. They want to, I mean, I know I have a high school senior, and he would do anything to be hanging out and having fun. Right now, actually, his last day of school was Friday. So, but no prom, no graduation. So that's another extra stress. I'm sure that, similar to how I am, the other teens' parents are worried about, the long time effects on those relationships with those friends from high school when they can't see each other and are not really being celebrated in the way that they should be. When I talked to my son about it, ironically, he's like, "Yeah, I wish we had a prom." But the rest of it, I guess he's just a boy. And I think he wishes that he had a graduation, but um, in the scheme of things, he's not letting on that it's bothering him. Um, so the other things that I talked a little bit about financial pressures. There's also, because people are home and they're looking back on other times when there has been recession or economic crisis, more than in their own home. There seems to be a lot more people who have weapons and have ammunition in their homes and accessible. They Guns are being hoarded, according to retailers, and the registrations for new gun ownership, in case there is an emergency and riots and things like that. Of course, if that occurs, there will be an even bigger increase in domestic violence. Another thing that is on the increase and always is a contributing factor to domestic violence and to abuse in general are alcohol and drugs. And as people sit home and, you know, whether they're outside celebrating the sunshine or inside watching a movie, it's very easy, when you never have to drive anywhere, to imbibe with too much quantity. And of course, both drugs and alcohol can shorten someone's patience. It can increase anxiety. It can become a depression. I'm sorry. It can have a depressive consequence. And depending on what you're taking, what you're mixing, what you're doing, certainly that would be a contributing factor to misinterpreting other people's feelings or other people's words or other people's actions, and cause an increase in violence or abuse. So, as we see these increases, obviously, um, I think that the world has heard a lot about what's going on in our prisons and our jails, and that would essentially have been a deterrent, we would hope, initially, from this kind of conduct during such a dire time. But as the jails and prisons continue to release people, through measures that we've talked about in prior weeks, it doesn't seem, according to the detective I spoke to this morning, it doesn't seem to be a factor in really in anything, unless that person has been a multiple offender. There's also there's been an increase in domestic violence in the various shelters and missions um, and where people can go if they're homeless or if they were just released from a correctional facility after they finish their quarantine. Um, the data shows that basically, and this is from the Marshall Project, and I love their numbers. They study everything. It's just so interesting to me how, if there's something you think of that there should be a study, the Marshall Project has already looked at it. So if you're bored one day, you can just go buzz around on that website and you'll find very, very interesting things. Um, so they did an article on April 22nd, 2020 that talked about is domestic violence rising during the coronavirus shutdown. Here's what the data shows. And I'm going to rely on that to give you some information. Remember, it's very hard to measure the scope of domestic violence. That's what we talked about on Friday, about what is essentially a conflict confined to the home. Um, unless it's reported, no one knows about it, and there are so many different kinds of abuse or domestic violence that often the data is fragmented. So we always have to keep that in mind. So remember, assessing the crime is different, and most police departments um, have do report their data, but it's on a yearly basis. So to narrow it down to really answer our question right now was a little more difficult. The So they basically looked at cities in different parts of the country that had 250,000 residents to 2.7 million residents. They reviewed each city's police department reports, and they found that in recent weeks, overall crime dropped by nearly 50% compared to the same weeks over the last 3 years. But domestic violence did not follow suit. In Chicago, domestic violence reports to the police fell by 23%, when crime overall dropped by 43%. So that's what happened in Chicago. But in other cities, you saw domestic violence go up while the crime rate went down. So what does this mean? Where are we going? Um, well, um, in Michigan, and we don't have exact numbers at this point. Our governor's been a little busy. Um, no, that's not the reason. But so basically, what I've heard from various police chiefs and as well as from the detective I spoke to this morning, um, for the most part, within Detroit, uh, crime is down and domestic violence is down, but not as much. It's a wider gap than what we saw with those Chicago statistics. Um, but what they did find out about Detroit, which was interesting, is they estimate that only half of the domestic violence is actually reported, and that includes child abuse. So again, kids aren't in school, they're not seeing the mandatory reporters, they're not seeing their counselor, they're not seeing their therapist in person, they're seeing them, possibly by video. So we have a lot of underreporting. So it's thought that as soon as this all opens up, there's going to be a surge. And how will we handle it? Well, the court system is already completely backed up. And these cases, what happens is when someone is arrested or separated from the scene, usually they're given a $100 bond or a personal bond if it's their first offense, and they're not held. So because they're not held, these cases are going to go to the end of the line. If they're in custody, then these cases would go closer to the front of the line. But there's probably people who have already been in custody and their domestic violence cases will go first. So those are all things to think about. And with that, I am going to move over to our coronavirus update. And, I'm outside, and so everything's blowing away. And so I'm going to do this off the top of my head because I don't know what happened. Maybe it's under here. Here it is. I'm going to say I don't know what happened to my numbers, but here they are. Okay, so today is June 1st, 2020. And at 2 o'clock, Mike Duggan and the Detroit Police Department Chief Craig will discuss the weekend protests. And at 3, Governor Whitner will be talking about the protests and doing her weekly Monday. It is Monday, right? Monday update. Over the weekend, there were 100 people arrested for defying the curfew in Detroit. Actually, that was on Sunday, not over the whole weekend. And last night, there was no violence in Grand Rapids and no tickets or arrests due to their newly imposed curfew. The Secretary of State opened today. It's by appointment only, but they are regular, like 9 to 5 hours. And the tribal casinos open today. Remember, before you go running to a casino, you have to check your region and where you are in the opening up plan to know if you're actually permitted to go to the casino. The up north, in the open regions in northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, I did hear reports over the weekend that they were continuing to ask people for ID, and if they were not residents of that area of the state, they were refused entry. There was also, speaking of travelers, at some of the riots over the weekend in Detroit, and these were riots not against stay home, not against COVID-19. This was purely against police violence and police misconduct and overuse of force, unnecessary force, things like that. There were a lot of people not from Detroit, not from Michigan, who participated in that protest. So again, as we try to contain coronavirus and we have these hotly contested divides amongst our citizens, are we really, at some point, it's all going to clash. So that needs to be figured out. As far as the casinos, however, if you are permitted to go, you should check out the website for the individual tribal casinos. They all have different rules, and you have to know before you go, because if you get there and they require a mask and you don't have a mask, they're not going to let you in. If you go to, check into the hotel and you're not wearing gloves, they might not let you in. You need to know if shields are required. You need to know if smoking is allowed. You need to know how they're serving drinks or not serving drinks. What you are allowed to bring in. My guess is, and I didn't go through these because I don't intend on going to a tribal casino right now, but my guess is that you're very limited as to what you can actually bring in as far as the size of your purse. It might be something like when you go to the sporting events in Detroit, those limitations, that it has to be clear, and I don't think that theirs has to be clear, but it has to be a little smaller than a certain size for people's safety and convenience. So know before you go. We now have 57,397 cases of COVID-19 in Michigan. That is 350 new cases over the weekend. That was kind of anticipated because of the opening of northern Michigan over Memorial Day weekend. There's 5,491 deaths. That's up 268. And the reason that this is upsetting to me is because if you recall, from Thursday to Friday, we had 28 deaths, but from Friday to Saturday, we had 268. They don't report on Sunday. So the other thing about reporting, if you are interested, now the cases, instead of being total for the state as being our only data available, if you go on michigan.gov coronavirus data page or statistics page, it's broken down by region and by county. So you can see if your region or county is going up or down and what phase you're in of the 6 phase plan. As everyone knows, those of us in Wayne and Oakland County, we are in Macomb County, we are still stuck in phase 3. So we are at home. So with that, I hope that you all have forgot to give you the 5 reasons. I should probably make you guys do the 5 reasons at this point. Protective services workers are essential. The police are essential. The hotbed of COVID-19 is in our jails and prisons. Um, Parents can get in trouble for kids being kids. And as we know, that has been the leading uh, parties that have been involved in domestic violence and abuse, according to local statistics in Michigan um, in the last month. And then last, uh, very few, if anyone, looks good in horizontal stripes. So we'll continue our series tomorrow on domestic violence and abuse, and we're going to talk about some of the crimes that you can be charged with and what the penalties are and what the outcome is and then we will flip it around and talk about if you're not the accused, if you're the accuser, what that will look like. So that's where we're going in our 5-part series here, and then and so, with that, I hope that you all stay home, stay healthy, stay well, smile, be happy, and I will see you tomorrow. Have a great day.